Hi there and welcome to Bike File, the bike show that tests all the latest bikes so you know exactly what you should be buying. Now, coming up on tonight's show, and luckily enough for me this week, I've managed to escape the freezing cold confines of the UK to come down here to the Amalfi Coast in southern Italy for the sunny launch of this, the lovely new Kawasaki Z1000. Climb aboard the big Z1000 and the first thing you're going to notice is how it miraculously shrinks between your legs. Not a nice feeling for most of us blokes I know, but in the case of this bike it actually works very well. The thing is, despite it weighing 198 kilos, once you get on, due to the low seat height, those big wide bars, it all becomes very manageable indeed. And also the way that bikini fairing and headlight cowl is also small in front of you, it makes the bike appear smaller than it is. So, muscling it about need not be the hard work you think it could be from the start. It's really a pretty comfortable motorcycle. The way the bars, the pegs and the seat are all set up hold you very nicely without stressing you across your shoulders or on your wrists or anything like that you might find on a sports bike. But with a few miles under your belt, what you're going to really want to start doing is getting silly with the throttle. Now if that motor sounds familiar, that's because this is the old ZX9 motor. But it has been changed a bit for the Z1000. Kawasaki brought it out to 953 cc's and stuck on fuel injection. Benefits of this are you've got a bit more mid-range and bottom end to the motor, but you don't have quite the same top end. Then again, who's going to want to do 160 mile an hour with no mega fairing? Now if I was to criticise the motor at all, I would say there's not quite the instant bottom end hit that I was expecting to find. But once you get above 4,000, things really do get motoring and there's stacks of mid-range for easy, fast progress or stupid stunting, depending on how you're feeling. A little sniff of the clutch and you're going to happily see the front wheel popping up into the air. It's not the easiest bike to balance on the back wheel once you're there, but then half the fun's practicing. Looking across the spec sheet, you'll find the Z1000 is pretty well equipped when it comes to the handling department. It's a fully adjustable monoshock at the back, and those big chunky 41mm upside down forks at the front are also adjustable for preload and rebound. It's not top sport spec kit, but it is very good, and especially on a basic bike like this, helps keep the whole plot together nicely. Now will customarily be time for us to head over to the scoreboards and see just exactly how the Z1000 rates. But before we do that, while we're still on this launch, we're going to pop over and have a word with the men at Kawasaki to see what they've got to say about their new baby, and also canvass some opinions from some of the other reprobate UK journalists who seem to be lurking around the bar.
Z1000 is a very important bike to Kawasaki. I mean, we're excited about it, but again, we made it. The bike is a statement standing still, and it makes a tremendous impression on people.
You know, front three quarters from the outside, there's that big engine, it's right in your face. The headlight arrangement, a little kind of bikini screen is, I mean, it's reminiscent of things that have gone before, but it's got a real nice modern twist to it.
A lot of attitude coming from this bike, so you don't have to chop down your blade or R1 anymore. You can buy this one right out of the block and be ready to go.
It seemed to have plenty of grunt about it, and it lifted all right, came up pretty good.
Right, but enough of what they thought, because it's time for the Bike File ratings. Performance, 7 out of 10, which means you can happily throw this bike around to the edge of the tyres and the limits of its ground clearance, and also get from A to B. Comfort, that's another 8 out of 10. Very good indeed. Nice plush seat, plenty of room to move about, good stretch to the bars, fits very nicely. Pillion accommodation is bearable, but not brilliant. Reliability, we're going to give it an 8 out of 10. I can't see anything major going wrong with this bike. All the technology is tried and tested and well put together. Value for money, 7 out of 10. It's up at the top end of the scale for these bikes, coming in at just over 7 grand once you've added the on the road charges in. But it is also a new model, so Kawasaki have had to do a lot of tooling up to get ready to make it, which is probably why the cost is up a bit. Well, that's it from us and the Z1000, so now it's over to Louise, who's got something a little bit different.
Thanks, Wazza. And now for a Harley. You know, it's difficult to understand, looking at this Sportster, to imagine that this bike began its starting life from the Harley Davidson race programme. You see, it all happened in the engineering department of that factory in Milwaukee when the engineers decided to experiment with an overhead valve version of the famous K-Racer. Then in 1957, after a bit of trial and error, it all came together and this bike was unveiled, the famous Sportster. All these years later, the Sportster in many ways remained unchanged, only it's as far away from a race bike as any two-wheeler could be. But whilst the R1 riding cynics out there will probably curse their way through the duration of this test, I have to admit this Harley ain't half bad. Powered by Harley's smallest motor, the 883 Evo, this bike may weigh well in at a rather unsportster-like 240 kilos and produce less horsepower than the manufacturers would care to mention, but it's quite good fun and effortless to ride. All the twins' power can be found low down in the rev range, and once up and over 5,000 revs there's very little going on. Now before all that power is transferred to the road, it goes via the standard issue 5-speed box, and although it only requires quite a positive shove, you just can't escape the whole clunkiness of the whole thing. And you know what, I would have thought by now Harley Davidson would have dialed that out, but I guess it's just part of the whole Harley-D thing. The wooden brakes are wholeheartedly unexciting. There's practically no feel to speak of, and even with a fistful of lever, you still can't stop the thing in a hurry. What's interesting though is the way a Sportster can be hustled through corners faster than you might think. The suspension may look rather primitive, but it does work. In fact, a well-ridden Sportster can prove quite a tool on a tight, twisty road, thanks to its half-decent geometry and low centre of gravity. But most will want a Sportster because it's a Harley Davidson, and not an expensive one at that, at £5,900. It's the baby of the range. The Sportster is the entry-level model. But don't forget, this is a special one. It's the R version and has a host of extras, including this rather retro-looking paint job. So let's see how our Sportster measures up with our scores on the doors. The performance rates 7 out of 10. That torquey motor will push you forwards at a reasonable rate so long as you access the low down power. Comfort, well, it's a bit of a stretch to those dirt bike style bars, but the riding position is overall pretty good and feels most relaxed. The suspension is also fairly supple. Build quality, our Sportster scores a 9. You see, these bikes are built to last. Every component is solid, and providing you look after the chrome properly, it will happily see you through many years of ownership. Value for money, well, around $5,999, but almost $1,000 more than the standard 883. The Sportster is well priced, and a fairly good bet for the first time buyer of a custom style machine. 8 out of 10. Street cred, 7 out of 10, because non-bikers think the Sportster is a fairly serious machine, lending a combination of presence, decoration and noise. Well, there's nothing like a Harley Davidson to pull the birds, is there? Right, let's go back over to Wazza now and see what he's up to.
Thanks for that, Louise. And now we have it, Harley's 883 Sportster, the entry level to some true Milwaukee American iron. But if it doesn't have to be American for you and you still want your bikes crude with plenty of style, but you want some serious grim factor in it as well, how about you try one of these? It's Yamaha's VMAX. This is quite possibly one of the daftest bikes on the planet and an absolute cult classic. It's been around so long now it should almost be in a museum, but preserving the VMAX for posterity rather than riding it would do the old girl a severe injustice, because climb aboard, give it some welly and you are in for a uniquely brutal experience regardless of how aged the bike is. This is a motorcycle that even now can make a Fireblade seem civilised, a ZX12 docile and a GSX R1000 a bit of a pussycat really. It blew people's socks off when it was first unleashed on an unsuspecting world 15 years ago and has been doing so ever since. The root of the VMAX's evil charm comes from bolting a 140 horsepower 1200cc motor into the weediest, bendiest chassis this side of your average garden wheelbarrow. We're talking modern day power meeting 1980s frame and suspension technology, and the end result is hilarious. Corners, unsurprisingly, are not the VMAX's forte. Those skinny old brims that can only handle mediocre rubber, the very basic suspension and the limited ground clearance of the Max combine with the monstrous 262 kilos dry weight to make it a handful at best. Up to 6,000 revs, it's mildly pokey and grunty, but it's nothing shocking. But from 6,000 upwards, it's an absolute animal thanks to Yamaha's V-Boost. It's enough to spin the back wheel in second gear while lifting the front at the same time and shunting your feet back off the pegs if you're not quite expecting it, and it plays absolute merry hell with the fuel consumption, but oh boy is it fun. Brakes are average at best, comfort is marginal, the styling is distinctive, but more because it's so dated and ugly than anything else, but none of this matters a jot. The VMAX is a defining motorcycle experience that no one who's experienced it will forget in a hurry. Performance, 7 out of 10. Absolutely, stormingly, stunningly ridiculous motor, but no real handling to speak of whatsoever, although this does kind of add to the fun. Styling, 5 out of 10. Old school, out of date, past it and kinda ugly, but at least it is different. Comfort, 5 out of 10. Not really, but then if you're buying a bike like this, perhaps comfort shouldn't be the top of your list. Value for money, 8 out of 10. It's not the cheapest bike around, but it is unique and a modern classic. Street cred, 7 out of 10. Those who don't know what they're talking about will think you're just riding some funny old motorcycle. Those who do will know you're on a serious piece of kit indeed. Anyway, that's enough of muscle bikes for part 1, but please do join us again in part 2, when Louise is going to be telling you exactly what you need to look out for buying yourself a muscle bike, and I'm going to be checking out Yamaha's beefy and chunky XJR 1300 SP. Hi there and welcome back to part 2 of Bike File, where in just a moment I'm going to be playing with this here XJR 1300 SP. But before we get on to that, it's time for Dr. Rod's big road test.
Confession time, folks. I don't like Ducatis. Cue gasps of astonishment from the biking world and an avalanche of hate mail from seasoned Ducati riders. But I've always found their big V-twins just too lumpy and intractable, and altogether a little too uncompromising for serious road use. So today's challenge, can this 900 monster convert me to the cause? There's no disputing the fact that Ducatis do have a legendary status in the biking world. For many they're the equivalent of a two-wheeled Ferrari, and when Ducati launched their first 900 Monster back in '93, it offered the kind of performance once reserved only for the likes of Mike Halewood, all in a radical street package. And this latest version belongs to a stable beloved of one Carl Fogarty. If you're looking for performance and exclusivity, the Big Duke offers everything you could possibly need in a motorcycle for under £7,000. And even I have to doff my cap at the engineering on show. This trellis frame is a work of art, and the lovely 904 V-twin engine, when it's on song, makes more poke than a very pokey thing indeed. And isn't this styling beautiful? Whether it's a practical bike or not, the Ducati really is a piece of sculpture that would grace any art gallery. And there's no arguing with the performance either. Open the taps and the Duke takes off like a scalded cat with a deep-throaty roar. The suspension is firm and taut, and the whole plot steers with precision. But despite the fuel injection, that low-speed lumpiness will keep you on your toes in heavy traffic. And for those like me who simply couldn't live with the riding position of a sports bike, the Monster represents a much more rideable option. Though I have to say that for my money, Ducati have still erred on the side of style over comfort, and the Monster feels cramped for anyone over the average height. Though it wouldn't suit me, I can understand the appeal of this bike. There's a certain purity of design that makes a Ducati so much more than just a motorcycle, and it's perhaps a little unfair to judge it by the standards of humdrum practicality. If you want one, you want one. Me, I'll stand aside and applaud your choice. So now, the score's on the doors. The bike has to score highly for performance simply because of its uncompromising approach to its task. This bike is built for mile after mile of thrilling speed with precision handling. And it delivers. 9 out of 10 for performance. Comfort is another story. If you're athletic enough to fit the Ducati's design brief, you'll love it. But you'd have to be a hardcore fan to claim it's a comfortable bike. 3 out of 10 for comfort. What you do get with each Big Duke is a free family-sized helping of street cred. 9 out of 10 for street cred. And is it reliable? Well, once upon a time Italian bikes were a nightmare of poor finish and poor components, but those days are now long gone. With Ducati's excellent and dedicated dealer network and superb after-sales care, you can buy with confidence. Now I'm off for another ride, so I'll hand you back to Wazza.
Well, thanks for that, Rod. And if that little lot has whetted your appetite and you're absolutely itching to buy yourself a muscle bike now, don't go away, because here's Louise with all the information you need to know.
Muscle bikes are the bike equivalent of the tall, dark, handsome, yet somehow dangerous stranger that you don't want your daughter to have anything to do with. If you want a mean-looking machine, then muscle bikes are where it's at. But do they live up to their bad boy looks?
A muscle bike's basically a sports bike without a fairing, large capacity engine, big tyres, big suspension, big brakes, just without the bodywork, like a retro style bike from, say, the early 80s.
Very good. You have your head blown off at 100 miles an hour. No, performance-wise, they're normally very, very mid-range, classed as a mid-range bike, and up the larger ones, which are up to sort of 1400cc, then obviously we've still got a top speed of round about 130, 140 miles an hour.
Muscle bikes are unfaired, so unless you've got a neck like an Aussie rugby player, then you're not going to see top speed. However, don't fear, the torquey engines have plenty of mid-range for Sunday afternoon antics, and they're also surprisingly agile. Nudge the bars and they're on their sides. Fun to ride and good to look at, a great combination. But are they a really practical beast to own?
I think so, yeah. Comfortable, ideal for sort of weekend use only if someone's got a performance bike that they're not using as much as they could do. A muscle bike is more multi-purpose, I would say, definitely.
A muscle bike's good value for money because you get cheaper insurance with them. They're a good all-round bike. You go shopping on them, go touring on them, and they've got the handling and the performance of a sports bike. They're just a generally good all-round bike.
Motorway cruising isn't a strong point on these bikes due to lack of wind protection, but on a set of twisties they're ideal. They aren't entirely suited to panniers and top boxes either, so touring isn't going to happen. The riding positions are a bit more forgiving than the sports bike, and the muscle bike makes up in looks what they lack in practicality. But will they behave on a day-to-day basis?
Owning a muscle bike, similar cost to running a sports bike. They run large tyres, so £200 for a set of tyres, £150 for a chain and sprockets. Fuel economy is again similar to a sports bike, 30-40 miles to the gallon. Insurance is slightly less because you haven't got all the road bodywork.
Normally the sector that have had performance bikes for maybe 2 or 3 years decided that they've got to the point now where they fancy a change or maybe something a little bit more sedate. Some people who feel they're in danger of losing their licence, having ridden a performance bike for a number of years and just ready really to sort of calm down but without losing that sort of power, and there's some good models available.
Most of these bikes have bulletproof, well-established engines that shouldn't give any trouble. If you're brave enough to take a bike out like this in nasty weather, be sure to hose it down after, as the engines are exposed to all that nasty salt and general road crud. Muscle bikes are a bit different. They have quite a bit of personality and the performance to back it up. So if you think you can take that dangerous stranger for a ride, have a crack at a muscle bike.
It's a funny thing about muscle bikes. On the one hand, they're a little bit like customs. The looks are absolutely all important. Gotta get that right. But on the other hand, they should have a bit more go in them than your average custom bike. So what about this one? The XJR 1300 SP. Well, looking down it, there's no doubts it's got the styling. Look at the size of that motor down there. Your neighbour is going to be very impressed by this, especially when you tell him it's 1300 cc's, which is probably bigger than his car that he's using to run about in. Check on down there, there's also the fins that make it look like it's got the genuine, authentic, old school air cooling. Actually, this is a proper modern motor with a liquid cooling in it. Hop on board the XJR and the first thing you're going to notice is that despite the fact that this is one solid, serious, hefty lump of motorcycle, it really doesn't feel that bad once you've got it moving. As long as you can get your feet down to the floor, you'll be able to ride one of these with no worries. Now in the case of this version here, this is the SP version. It's a few £100 more, and the only real difference you get for that is the Öhlins shocks down the back here. They do actually help the handling, but we'll come to that later. The only other difference with the SP over the standard XJR is the paintwork. Now, sadly, this one is a little bit on the subdued side. Normally, there's another version in a beautiful blue and white. As with all good retro muscle bikes, the heart of the XJR is not a brand new engine. In fact, this motor goes way back into the early 80s when it used to be the power plant for the FJ1200. Now at the time, that was a cutting edge sports bike. People said it was so powerful, but to be honest, if you rode one now, it would feel a little bit flat as far as sportiness goes. However, this motor has a new lease of life. One thing the FJ motor was always very good at was being smooth, torquey and creamy. Loads of mid-range, not loads of top end, but up to about 100 mile an hour, you've got stacks of shovel and go, and that's exactly what you need in a big naked muscle bike like this. But all is not entirely perfect with the XJR. There are a couple of faults we can find. The fuel gauge, very useful to have it, but it gets to about halfway down, which takes quite a long time, then suddenly plummets right the way through the second half of the tank. Either it's a very funny shaped fuel tank or not a perfectly designed gauge. Best thing about the XJR, not only does it have the looks, the styling, the comfort, all those things a muscle bike should have, it also is the way it hangs together beautifully as much more than the sum of its parts. In case you hadn't guessed, I do really rather like this motorcycle, but now it is time for the scores. Performance, 8 out of 10. This may not be the most amazing performing motorcycle ever, but in terms of what muscle bikes should do and what this one does do, it really is excellent. Comfort, 8 out of 10. Plenty of room, no cramping for your arms or your legs, everything's where it should be. Value for money, 7 out of 10. You've got a big lump of good looking motorcycle for just over 6 grand. Street cred, 7 out of 10 in the case of this model with that rather subdued paint job, but if you get the slightly tricker painted options, definitely an 8 out of 10. Reliability, 7 out of 10. This is a well-made motorcycle. That motor is next to unburstable, as is the gearbox. The brakes are well proven. The only thing you're going to have to do is spend a bit of time with the toothbrush and the solvo, keeping the thing nice and clean. Right then, well I'm afraid that's it for this episode of Bike File, but please do join us again next week when we'll be back with a load of commuters on test. In the meantime, all that's left to do is for me and the XJR to get on with doing what muscle bikes do best.